Hey, welcome back. It's time for our weekly conversations with some of the world's most amazing, but maybe not so famous achievers. On the one show we call Conversations with Not So Famous Achievers. On what they did and how they did it. And what we can learn from their journeys. With your hosts, Will Christ, and of course, Robert White.
Hey, welcome to all. I'm so excited about our session today because I get to introduce my dear friend, Darryll Stinson. Darryll and I met in a retreat for business people up in Utah. He is imposing, first of all, physically. He's about 19 feet tall and way more fit than me, which induces a tremendous amount of jealousy. But he's also a presence in terms of his energy, his being, and I'm especially excited about having him be with us today because I've just finished his wonderful book, even though I'm certainly not an athlete or a post athlete or anything like that. But I found the book amazing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. Darryll, welcome. Delighted to have you with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for everyone tuning in. It's going to be fun. I hope we don't scare anyone away.
Well, I got a question for you right away, Darryll.
Come on.
Robert mentioned something. You're talking about life after sports, right?
That's right.
So, Robert, I want to ask you, for you and me, is there such a thing as life before sports?
Well, Darryll's involvement was definitely not as a spectator. He is an elite athlete who got ambushed by physical energy or physical injury. He certainly has a lot of energy. And the book's a lot about, certainly about what happens when your identity as an elite athlete gets taken away from you. But, you know, for many of us in whatever we do, we have an identity. And sometimes that identity gets, whether you say crushed or disappeared or attacked or somehow our confidence in that identity is lessened or even destroyed. And Darryll's journey around that is the part that, among many things, that really interested me and fascinated me and that I learned from.
So tell us, Robert, Darryll, tell us a little bit about your book, and I want to hear about the book, but also want to hear about where it came from.
Yeah, so the book's Who Am I After Sports? An Athlete's Roadmap to Discover New Purpose and Live Fulfilled. In it, I talk about my battle with mental health, and I open with this story of how I was laying in the psychiatric unit screaming at the doctors to leave me alone and just let me die because I didn't think I had life after sports, that it was worth living, that there was anything that would fulfill me like athletics once did. So I open there, and then the core of the book is our athlete's transition roadmap, which is really a transition blueprint for anyone who is trying to figure out who are they after you fill in the blank. Who am I after business? Who am I after marriage? Who am I after military? And it is one of those things where if you're in a season of transition, maybe you went through the pandemic and lost your job, maybe you were an executive for 40 years and finally retired, and you're trying to figure out who am I after this thing. The book walks you through the 5 phases of transition. And then I end with this really poetic story that goes deeper into my psychiatric experience and offers hope to many people who read the book.
Wow. So, what can you tell us a little bit about what put you in there? What was the injury that you found?
Yeah, I always tell people this way. My identity was attached to my activity. There was no separation between the work that I did and the person I was. And so anytime your identity is attached to your activity, you make poor decisions. And so when I got hurt my freshman year, instead of focusing on my education, which is what my coaches offered me the opportunity to do, I decided to come back after a back injury to play Division I football. I mean, I begged, I kicked, I screamed to allow them to give me a shot to play because sports was who I was. It wasn't just what I did. And so they adjusted and they said, sure, try it out. And the way that I sum up this story is that I wasn't supposed to walk within more than a mile within 6 months of my back surgery. I was starting within 6 months. And I did so at a cost to my physical health.
Mm.
I manipulated the healthcare system. I was getting multiple epidural shots in my back. I was getting acupuncture, physical therapy 7 days a week, 2 times a day. They prescribed me to these things called opioids. And so was taking illegal doses of these opioids to continue to numb my pain to play the game of football. And it was all in my head in hopes of like, hey, when I get to the NFL, then I'll be able to stop this addiction. Then I'll be able to stop abusing the healthcare system. And I'll find some great specialist like Robert, and he'll be able to fix me. And it just didn't happen. I just got worse. And because I was so physically gifted, I was still able to earn a starting position. We won a MAC championship. I played with some great players. Some of, if you follow NFL, Antonio Brown, who's one of the best receivers of all time, arguably, Eric Fisher, who's a number 1 draft pick, a couple other Super Bowl winners. And I was amongst that elite team. And my hope was to play at that next level. And one thing I say here is that no one knew I was battling depression, because when you are extremely talented at anything, it's hard for people to see beyond your gift and to see the person. And I was so desperately wanting people to see that, hey, I was going to these extremes to be able to continue to play this sport, but I was going home, not wanting to wake up the next day, not feeling like I was enough,
Mm.
feeling like if I lost this thing, this athletic ability, this activity in sports, then no one would really care about me. Because prior to me playing sports, no one really liked me that much. I know I'm handsome now, but I wasn't always that handsome.
Oh, all right, so I see this picture of a really tough experience for you.
Yeah,
Successful on the playing field, and then going home and struggling.
absolutely.
So you're not there now. What changed?
Well, I crashed and burned. Going into my senior year, I had been taking so many opioids that it was thinning my blood to the point where every time that I would make contact on the field, my nose would bleed. Coaches would ask me, Stinson, what's going on, man? I'm like, nothing, coach. It's just allergies. And, they would allow me to play because they needed me. And I was, I don't know if you know this, but you're not supposed to play Division I football after a back surgery. And I did that. So the pounding after 2 years of that and practices and weightlifting, I started to develop this permanent hunch in my back. And you could see that there was a lot of tension between my legs and my back, because when I would run, I would kind of limp. But I was extremely fast. So I'm 6'5". I was an all-star track athlete in high school. So I ran a 4.4 for a 6'5" guy, which is like unheard of athletic speed for a guy my height. So I was running, catching running backs, limping. And so they kind of knew something was wrong, but they couldn't put their finger on it. Going into my senior year, they were like, man, there's too many nosebleeds. This guy's missing practices. We're hearing rumors about him getting some illegal procedures done. And whatever it is, we don't want to get ourselves in trouble. We don't want him to get hurt. So we gotta stop this thing before it gets too bad. And they called me into the training room and they said, hey, this is it. We would love for you to still be a leader around for the underclassmen, but we can't allow you to do this anymore. And boy, was I pissed. I mean, I thought they quit on me, gave up on me. Not only were they not paying for my medical expenses to begin with, because they would have been liable for my injury or death on the field, but now they wouldn't even give me an opportunity at my dream. What would I do without that? And so I imploded.
Mm.
And I didn't know some of the stuff that Robert teaches, and I'm sure you're aware of as well, which is simply how to communicate my emotions. The only emotion I knew how to communicate was anger.
Mm.
So I stormed out of the weight room. I was mad at everybody. And I started to have these thoughts of, man, life is not going to be fulfilling without my first love. It wasn't that I didn't think that I would be successful at anything else. I just didn't think that I would be fulfilled. And so one thing led to another. I started to mix my alcohol with pills, hoping that I wouldn't wake up the next day. I started to toy around with suicide letters. And the one person that I confided in was this girlfriend I had dated. She was my high school sweetheart. We dated for 4.5 years, and we did all the cheesy, cute couple things that young people do. We picked out our kids' names. We wrote my last name next to her first name in cursive and all that cute stuff. And we had our whole life planned. Well, when I wasn't going to the NFL anymore, she left me and got engaged to another man,
Ooh, ooh.
which validated this insecurity that I had that I wasn't enough to
Yeah.
be liked without sports.
Worthless, right?
And I don't know if you guys ever been there where you're good at something. Maybe they like listening to your radio show. Maybe you're just so handsome that you're known for your good looks. And you're like, man, do they actually like me for my personality, for my character, for my unique character traits? Or do they just like me because I can sing, because I can make them laugh, because I'm great at business? And when she left me, I was like, see, I knew it. That's the only thing people like about me is my ability to play sports.
And otherwise, I'm worthless, right?
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt. And
I
so I was like,
wonder how many people in the world feel that way right now.
a lot of people. I believe it's what causes divorce. I believe it's what separates children from their parents. I believe it's what causes overworking, people who cannot leave the office because they are defined by what they do. If I don't meet this sales quota, if I don't meet this business goal, then man, I don't have any ground to stand on because people just like my performance. They don't like me.
You know, when I read your book, Darryll, I was really touched, really moved. And one of the memories it brought up for me was a number of years ago, I read a long article about the famous Japanese baseball player, Ichiro Suzuki. You know, he was a big hit in Japan. He came to the US. You know, just absolutely incredible story. You know, 200 or more hits in his first 10 seasons. He hit 262 hits in 2004. I mean,
Whoa.
this guy was a monster. But it was near the end of his career. He had played for the Mariners, and he was now playing for the Marlins down in Florida. You know, he became the 30th baseball player in history in Major League Baseball to hit 3,000 hits. Unfortunately, did it against my Colorado Rockies. However, what the article was really about was that he was staying in the game way longer than he should have stayed in the game.
Mm-hmm.
He was sacrificing his health, and he was unhappy and all of that stuff. And the people around him would not confront him, which is a similarity to your story. But the big thing was that he could not imagine any life after baseball. And I remember reading it and going, what incredible sadness it generated in me that this superstar who had done it all and made tons of money and fame and accomplished so much was unable to see what was next for him in his life. That there were, you know, just like for all of us, that there's many ways to contribute, and he couldn't see that. And I was so sad for him. He eventually transitioned to the front office of the Seattle Mariners. They made a spot for him, and I think that's a very generous thing to do and a very human thing to do. And I don't know all of the story about his leading, but this idea for an elite athlete, yourself or Ichiro, or for an elite business person who has a disappointment. Maybe they got fired. Maybe they got transferred to the division of no responsibilities. You know, different things happen. Maybe they get some problem in their marriage that ambushes them, or at least that's their experience of it. And in the work that I do with executives, quite often it's generated by some kind of a wreck. You know, something happens like that, and it's based around this issue that you address so wonderfully in your book about losing an identity that you have built carefully, strongly, committed yourself to, and but it becomes the defining belief in your life, and when it goes away, you are adrift. You're lost. You know, my friend John Denver has this great song called "Sweet Surrender." One of my favorite lines from a song is "Lost and alone on a forgotten highway." You know. And when I read your book, I thought of that also. But it's a
So
great book.
All right, so what do we know about preventative or things to do when I mean, I'm just thinking about this whole notion of helping people become aware that they can create their whole identity with regard to a particular culture, a particular personal trait, or a particular activity. How do we, how can we help people to become aware of that?
Yeah. From a high level, when I talk to executives and companies, here's one thing I say that helps them to grasp if they have an issue or not. Is I say, do you have a system of success in your company or in your life? Do you know disciplines, habits, routines? Is there a system that helps you to be successful? Hands go up, raise. I've got that. And then I ask them, well, what's your system of self-care? I take vacations once a year. and that's the problem, is that oftentimes we have systems for success, but we don't have systems for self-care. So we start there. How do I develop a system of self-care for myself? And we do that through journaling. We do that through meditating. We do that through play and fun and having activities to do that has nothing to do with our work. Okay. As it relates to developing a sense of identity on the preventative side, we have to start to not just become aware of what our other skills, talents, passions, likes, desires are, but we have to start rewarding those as well. Okay. Give you an example. My parents, my cousins, my third, fourth, fifth cousins, who probably weren't even really my cousins, they just lied about it. they all found a way to attend my athletic games. Okay. When I graduated from high school and celebrated, we do an open house. It's kind of our tradition, invite all the people to celebrate my high school graduation. Third cousins, fourth cousins weren't there. We valued and celebrated athletic ability more than we did education. The same can be true for our children as they grow up, and there's certain things that maybe they excel at. We definitely want to affirm that and all their accolades, but we need to give just as much attention and rewards to when they're making kind decisions, to when they're having fun and they're playing. My daughters, I have 3 daughters, they're all in the age of 7. They come to me about something that seems so meaningless, and they want to show me some craft that they made, or they want to show me, this weird little thing that they figured out how to do with their toys and make it go down some slide like a domino effect type thing. And I need to celebrate and award that so they can start to see like, hey, I'm not going to tie my identity to this one area of my life where where I excel at. Those are some practical ways we can begin to be preventative in the way that we develop our identities.
Well, I could imagine that there are people who organize their life around being always on in this particular thing that they've projected to be their identity. And then the vacation is really just time to breathe away from it because I'm going to come back and get right back in. Is that what happens, Robert?
Well, anything that is habitual starts to become unconscious. And both good habits and bad, unfortunately. I think what Darryl's pointing to is the need to, really, it is self-care. It's developing routines that include a broader piece of your life. I did some research a few years ago about people in transition. at the time of the 2008-2009 economic contraction, many people, many senior executives lost their jobs.
Mhm.
And, the reality is they weren't going to get another one. And so one of the things that we found out was that divorce rates in America have been generally stable for 20 or 30 years. But within that stability is a huge difference depending on the age of the married couple. And that is that younger people were getting divorced at a much, much lower rate. And people over 55 were getting divorced at a very high rate. And one of the learnings behind that was that during the marriage, and this was at that time primarily a male thing to be the breadwinner and the woman to be the little woman or whatever, the housewife and the mom. And what we learned is that the guy had one interest which he pursued and was incredibly successful with. And it's amazing, that making the 500,000, 700,000, $1 million a year salary with bonus. And, but that's all that he knew. And, a lot of travel, generally, a lot of meetings, a lot of late nights, all that kind of stuff. But in the meantime, his wife has maybe gotten involved in an Oprah book club. And she's going on a vacation once a year to Tucson or somewhere like that for a retreat with her college friends. She's maybe got involved in something like Landmark or LifeSpring, the company that I founded years ago, and did some personal growth work on herself. She's more active in her church. She's got a wide-ranging group of friends that she meets for coffee or a glass of wine. She develops a broader and deeper sense of relationship with the world that she's part of. And then this guy comes home, he's just been laid off or fired with no other life. And that kind of quite often leads to divorce. She learned how to do some self-care. He didn't. He learned how to work. And, that pattern that I see in my executive clients is unfortunately quite common. They're almost embarrassed to tell you about some interests that they have away from work. And they don't celebrate that. Darryl's point about his kids is absolutely accurate. We get what we get approval. Whatever we get approval for becomes part of that identity. And again, when we become unconscious about it, it can trip us up.
Darryll, do you see this across gender lines? I mean, is it generally men who are following this pattern of projecting my identity onto something, and women being more relational, or is it a different characteristic for both?
In my experience, it is high achievers is the type of person that it affects more than men or women specifically. If I had to trace a X factor, I would say 7 out of 10 times when a person has identity issues or a one-dimensional view of their identity, I trace it back to the lack of a emotional and physically present father in the household. A lot of people have fathers who were physically present but emotionally absent. And it's a father's role in large part to shape the identity of their child. It's something about hearing dad say, "I'm proud of you," that just carries a weight that oftentimes it doesn't carry with mom, because mom is a nurturer. She's supposed to love her child, but
Right.
dad's approval just carries a different weight. And I swear, 7 out of 10 people I talk to, whether they're male or female, and when you really start digging into their childhood, you can trace it back to a father who wasn't emotionally present or wasn't there at all.
I can tell you exactly the most important thing my dad did for me.
What's that?
When I was a junior in high school, he came home and he said, now my name was Buzz at the time, and he said, "Buzz, we're going to buy you the great books of the Western world.
Mm,
And I still have those up here on my shelf.
that's
And
awesome.
that just opened the world for me. And it wasn't just me, because I lived in the library, our local library. But for him to say, this is what we're going to get for you, that just made my world.
Mm,
Wow, that's incredible. We're going to take a break in a moment and hear from some very supportive friends of Will and mine. And but Darryll, I'd like you to just kind of prepare yourself to either dig into a question I'd like to ask you, or to learn how to very smoothly avoid it. You know, you're talking just now about the absence of the really present father in people's lives. I know that's also a contributing factor to many people with problems with addiction. I know you've done a lot of work, and that you had a recent really tragic happening with some people that you're very committed to, that you loved, respected, and were working with deeply. I'd like you to think about how you've come through that, how you've in effect recovered from losing some very special people in your life in a really tragic accident. But for right now, let's take a break, and we'll be back very soon.
Traction Tools is the EOS software for visual collaborative problem solvers like you, built to manage each key component of your business, including vision and traction, data, people, meetings, and even process. The new digital whiteboard helps you illustrate, communicate, and work together throughout the decision-making process, and our new document drive makes file sharing even easier. So, if you want to save time and reduce repetitive tasks with easy automations, you really should take a look at Traction Tools and their EOS software. Sign up for a 30-day free trial at mytractiontools.com. That's mytractiontools.com. And now back to our show.
Thanks, Paul. And again, Darryll, I'm uncomfortable asking you to be as vulnerable as this kind of situation requires. So feel free to duck it a bit if you'd like. But what happened in your life? What were you up to, and how did that all get interrupted for you?
yeah. Well, let me reframe vulnerability for those who may be a little shy at that word. And I'll play to our competitors' edge, Robert and Will. So, uh, when someone dares me to do something, like they say, I can't, there's a little high school kid around the block who told me to check up, like play him one-on-one in basketball. And I'm like, this guy doesn't know that I was an athlete. Like I'm getting ready to destroy him. I might look fat, but I still can play. and whenever I'm challenged, I never see it as a weakness. I never back down from that. I actually muster up the courage to take on the challenge. I see vulnerability the same way. Vulnerability takes incredible strength. It's actually weaker. It takes less strength to not be vulnerable than it does to actually be vulnerable. So when I'm asked to be vulnerable, I take on the challenge the same way I would if someone's asking me to play them one-on-one. So challenge accepted. um, I started an addiction recovery ministry here in Metro Atlanta. Started with about 17 people, and it was just one partner, and they would meet in a room that was vacant in our church, and we would, give them coffee, water, give them a message of hope and inspiration, help them with tools and resources to get their life back together. Long story short, over the course of a year and a half, it started to grow really fast. We see over 100 people each week at one location, but we also have an offspring of 7 different partners throughout the community who are offering addiction recovery services in some form or fashion. And from leading that kind of charge, started to mentor some people who were really serious about achieving great levels of success as it relates to influence and popularity and that type of thing. One of these young ladies her name was Normie, and she had more than a year clean. And we would tell, when they would get like a year clean, we would start to tell some of their stories about how they came back and overcome this addiction. and we would get the film crew to, do interviews, and I'd ask them questions, and we'd highlight and see them in their environments, and just be a really cool way to honor them and celebrate their legacy and really promote their future. And we had did a series of those, and Normie would be like, Darryll, when are you gonna tell my story? When are you gonna tell my story? And I was like, you know what? We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. Got busy, pushed it off. And the week before this tragic accident happened, in fact, it was more like 3 or 4 days, she saw me at church and she said, when are you going to tell my story? And I was like, Teesh. I had developed another leader. I wasn't actively leading it anymore. I'm still involved somewhat, but not as hands-on. I was like, dang. But I was like, you know what? I'll figure out something. She was like, good, because I have a story to tell. I'm going to inspire a lot of people. I'm on vacation in Florida. The phone rings, and they say, have you turned on the news? And I said, no. And they said there was a tragic accident. The 15 passenger van had 16 young women in it. They lost control of the vehicle as they were trying to turn off the exit. It flipped over. It caught instantly on fire. Uh, she burned alive. And 4 died instantly. Everyone else was in critical care. 2 of the other individuals ended up passing away a few days later, and the rest survived. And I was so frustrated because I violated one of my rules. I say never put off till tomorrow what you can do today, and I did that, and I put it off, and I was hurt. I was mad at myself. I obviously missed her. Life has a way of awarding us second chances. In the middle of me crying and mourning and figuring out what remarks I was going to offer to the community because the phone was ringing, one of those phone calls was a news channel reaching out saying, hey, we are so sorry for your loss. We were wondering if you're comfortable telling us a little bit more about Normie. I had the opportunity to tell her story on national television. And it's not how I anticipated it, but it's me still fulfilling what I promised her.
Mm-hmm.
And you should have seen her funeral. It was packed. She would have never guessed. I would have never guessed that this is the amount of lives she impacted. I mean, to her family, she was sort of like the black sheep, and they had given up on her. And at her funeral, because of her electric personality, she loved to dance. She had influenced so many people that the sanctuary was full. And I got to tell her story again in front of those people as I offered my remarks at her funeral service. It has been one of the most rewarding things in my life, and it has lit a fire underneath me to share other people's story. I'm so grateful that you guys are allowing me to share mine and giving me another platform to share her story, because she's what I would call an everyday hero.
Mm-hmm.
She might not be famous. She may never write a best-selling book, but she made a huge impact.
Not so famous achiever.
Not so famous. And it reminds me of the Dr. Seuss quote where Dr. Seuss says, to the world, you may just be someone, but to someone, you may be the world.
Yeah. Wow. That notion, first of all, thank you for sharing the story, touching our hearts, and also for the lesson that's within it. You're incredible, and that's an incredible story.
Thank you.
You know, neither Will nor I are psychologists, but we kind of tend to play one on TV, that kind of thing. And certainly try to have an understanding of people that's deeper than how they present themselves. And this piece about vulnerability is, I remember watching the video of Brene Brown that, about 20 million people have watched on YouTube. And, she's incredibly gifted. She's done the research. She's smart. but she's also got a self-deprecating kind of sense of humor
Yeah.
that, that puts the message across. Uh, I'm personally, I'm not that interested in getting into the story of why particularly men hesitate to express vulnerability, but rather, what can we do about it now? And I know there are also women that kind of stay in a lightweight story instead of getting a little bit deeper.
Mm.
It's not just men, but let's face it, we have developed a fear of vulnerability that's incredible.
Yeah.
My way of talking about leadership is to remind people that it's mostly based on relationships,
Hmm.
and relationships are based on trust. And a big aspect of building trust is to be vulnerable. What's it going to take for the superstars, the incredibly successful people that listen to this podcast, or for Robert or for Will, to be more vulnerable? What's it really going to take? Since we tend not to want to spend the next 2 years on a therapist couch, So
Yeah.
what can we do now if we want to be more vulnerable without coming across as weak and all of those fears we have about being vulnerable?
I love this is so phenomenal. By the way, I'm planning to do several other TEDx talks. I've done 2 so far. One of them I want to do on vulnerability. All right, I have 2 things I got to share. Okay, the first one is we have to normalize the conversation. I remember where you and I met, Robert, when you facilitated an activity for us. You first modeled vulnerability, and it set the tone for the room. And it was an extremely vulnerable place. It wasn't something that was a scar from 10 years ago. It was something that's still healing now. And that created a level of vulnerability in the room. So we normalized the conversation. To paint this picture, if you've ever been to a conference with several thousand people, if one person stood up in that room and started clapping, they would feel so uncomfortable. Oh man, am I breaking the rules? Why am I doing this? If everyone stood up and clapped and applauded, the energy level would just go to out the roof. In the same fashion, that's how we need to normalize vulnerability. Oftentimes, it's only a few people. It's that one person in the room standing clapping and it feels uncomfortable. But when everyone does it, I feel more comfortable. I feel a part of the pack versus an outlier. Okay. So modeling vulnerability is one way that we affect change. The second way is reframing how we see it. Okay. And knowing what a lack of vulnerability actually produces in our life. So at our deepest core, which you guys probably know this better than I, we all want to be loved, to be accepted. Okay. You cannot be fully loved unless you are fully known. The only way for you to be fully known is by being vulnerable. I always say it this way: vulnerability is like the Batman signal for love. The more vulnerable you are, the more it shines that signal to let love know that it's time to rush in. Quick personal story. When I was going through my bout with depression, I was so desperately looking for someone to love me for who I was and not just for what I could do. But that required a level of vulnerability that I had not learned yet how to articulate. So when I would tell people that I'm going through a tough time, I'm feeling down, I'm missing sports, the way that somebody responds to that is far different than the way that somebody would respond to me saying that I'm thinking about ending my life.
Wow.
One
Wow.
is more vulnerable than the other. And so if I'm more vulnerable, I then attract more love into my life. When we start to see this is the impact that vulnerability really has, this is how we actually get the love and acceptance we desire. It inspires us to take action and to be more vulnerable because it produces the results that we deeply desire.
I want to ask a little bit about we've talked about personal vulnerability and how being a therapist, experiences in groups with gifted people like Robert. to help us to become personally more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
What I have been just fascinated with is in the EOS process, one of the things that we do every year is we call it team health.
Mm-hmm.
And what it really is vulnerability. We start off with, the first year we were asking questions, 6 or 7 questions about where somebody came from, how many kids, how many siblings they had, and then what was the worst job that you had, and then tell us something that we don't know. That's
Love it.
one level. Then we get to what we call the one thing. And what it is we go around the circle in the leadership team first saying, Darryll, this is one thing that I just think you are great at. And we share that with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go back around again. Darryll, this is the one thing I want you to start doing or stop doing for the good of the organization. That becomes, out of the 2 days, that becomes one of the most highly remembered pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is exciting to me is, yes, we are getting much more involved with Brene Brown's leadership of personal vulnerability, but we can also bring that into the organization. And I'll whisper it to you, because what we're doing is exactly what you're saying, is we are creating places of love in, oh my gosh, business.
Yeah, I love it.
It's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. You know that in my work, it often involves family business. I'm dealing with some very successful entrepreneurs, and they're starting to think about transferring power and money, and they want to keep their company in the family, all of those kinds of things. And my great teacher, a guy who knows more about the dynamics of family business than I will ever know, is David Bork. And the way that I met David was I was on the board of directors of the WinStar Foundation, John Denver's Environmental Education Foundation. And we did a once-a-year event called Choices for the Future. 1,800 people in the music tent in Aspen, and it was just an incredible event, great speakers. And during one of those sessions, the tone in the group, like over a 2-day period, became essentially anti-capitalist and anti-business and anti-success. And I'm noticing it. I don't know what to do about it. And then this tall, lanky guy with a booming voice put up his hand, and somebody called on him, and he stood up and he basically said that he works with business people, and they're among the finest people he's ever met. And then he got specific about it. He took on an energy of 1,800 people, but with great respect for them, he didn't make them wrong. He just talked about his personal experience in a way that moved me, definitely. And on the next break, I almost ran through people to find him, to introduce myself, to get to know him, to know, because I admired that so much. Having the courage, though, to really speak your truth, really share who you are and what your experience is. I think that's what many, many people are stepping up to today, and that we can all, through our example, help them do that.
We have one of the things that our discipline, as our 416 EOS implementers around the country, when we're talking, when we're trying to solve a problem or we have an issue, our rule is we only talk from personal experience. No speculation, no theory, no somebody said this in a book. But the question is always, here's the problem. Who has had experience with this? Sometimes it's no one. But the quality of it, it requires vulnerability. And I just envision a world where all we do is talk about personal experience. I mean, it would be such an astounding world if we weren't listening just to the news about what's going on in Atlanta or Denver or Laguna, Beach. It was really, this is my experience that I can share with you. Amazing.
Well, we've had a wonderful experience today. Darryll, thank you so much for being so vulnerable, for sharing a journey that is an amazing journey, both of struggle, of success, of struggle, of redemption, and of your own personal commitment going into the future. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about just briefly as we wrap up. How can people get in touch with you? How can we support you and your work? But on behalf of Will and myself, just a deep gratitude for today.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me. You can reach out to me, Darryll, at darrylstinson.com. I'm sure you guys got links and show notes and all that stuff for people to take action on that. It's DARRYLL at Darryll Stinson, STINSON.com. And just reach out to me, shoot an email if there's any way that I can be of service to you, or if you align with my mission and my message and want to see how we can impact the world together. It is my deepest heart desire to impact 1 billion people before I leave this planet. And the only way that I can do that is collectively with other great people like you.
Wow. Wrap it up, Will.
Hey, Darryll, thank you so much, because what we're really looking for here are people exactly like you, people who are achievement oriented, and probably because they are experiencing more than just that one thing, they're not so famous. So that's why we have these great conversations with the not so famous achievers. I look forward to more conversations with you. Your book is coming to me. You have my book. I have your number. We're going to talk.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
And that wraps it up again for another conversation with some not so famous achievers. Right here in Orange County's only community radio station, octalkradio.net. Streaming live from the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied Innovation Center.